She was sent to choose him for death, but she fell in love with him instead. And when a Valkyrie defies Odin, even the gods cannot predict what happens next. This is the story they never put in the comics. You think you know the Valkyries. You have seen them in movies, in comics, in video games. Beautiful warrior women with gleaming armor and feathered wings, serving as noble guardians of fallen heroes. You have watched them ride across golden skies, escorting brave souls to Valhalla, where they will feast and fight until Ragnarok comes. But that version is a lie, a sanitized, romanticized shadow of what the Valkyries truly were. In the original Norse sagas, the Valkyries were not angels, they were not gentle, they were not even entirely human. They were the daughters of kings and gods, women who had transcended mortality to become something far more terrifying. The choosers of the slain, servants of Odin the All-Father, who presided over war and death with cold, calculated purpose. Their name means exactly what it sounds like. Val, the slain, Kyrie, chooser. They decided who lived and who died on the battlefield, not through mercy or justice, but through Odin's will and their own mysterious judgment. They rode through the chaos of battle on horses whose hooves touched only air, invisible to the dying men below. They watched warriors fight with desperate courage, knowing that bravery meant nothing if a Valkyrie had already marked you for death. They reached down with pale hands and pulled the souls from still warm bodies, carrying them to the afterlife before the blood had finished pooling in the mud. And they did this without emotion, without hesitation, because they were weapons of fate itself. But here is what the myths reveal, slowly, like a secret whispered in the dark. The Valkyries were not just instruments of death. They were women, and women, even divine ones, have always possessed something the gods fear more than any weapon: the ability to choose who they love. The Vikings understood this paradox better than any culture before or since. They built their entire worldview around it. War was sacred. Battle was prayer. To die with a sword in your hand was to earn eternal glory in Odin's hall. But love? Love was chaos. Love was the one force that could break fate itself. And when a Valkyrie, a being created to enforce destiny, fell in love with a mortal warrior, when she refused to take his soul, when she defied the All-Father to save the man who had captured her heart, the entire cosmology fractured. These are not stories about romance. These are stories about what happens when the instruments of fate develop free will, when the reapers refuse to reap, when love becomes a form of holy rebellion against the gods themselves. And every single one of these stories ends in tragedy. Because the universe cannot allow love to overthrow death. The gods cannot permit mortals to escape their doom. And the Valkyries, no matter how powerful, are still bound by chains they cannot see. Tonight, we tell 5 stories. 5 Valkyries who chose love over duty. 5 warriors who earned the attention of women who controlled life and death. 5 tragedies that reveal the true cost of defying fate. The first story begins with a ring of fire and a woman who chose to sleep for eternity rather than serve a god who betrayed her. Brynhildr was the greatest of all Valkyries. Odin had forged her himself, or so the legends claim, shaping her from starlight and iron will, giving her the power to see into the hearts of warriors and judge who deserved glory and who deserved oblivion. She served him perfectly for centuries, riding through countless battles, delivering countless souls. She never questioned. She never hesitated, until the day Odin commanded her to kill a king who did not deserve to die. His name was Agnar. He was young, honorable, beloved by his people, but he had offended Odin in some small, forgotten way, and the All-Father demanded his death. Brynhildr descended to the battlefield. She watched Agnar fight, watched him defend his warriors, watched him spare enemies who yielded, watched him lead with the kind of courage that makes even gods pause. And she made a choice that would damn her forever. She let him live. Odin's rage was instantaneous. He appeared before her in the Hall of the Slain, his one eye blazing with fury that could crack mountains. "You have defied my will," he said. "You have broken the sacred law." "He was a better king than the one you wanted to win," Brynhildr replied, her voice steady, even as her fate was being sealed. "You do not decide what is better," Odin said. "That is my burden, and now you will learn what happens to those who take that burden upon themselves." He cursed her, stripped away her immortality, condemned her to become mortal, to eventually age and die like the humans she had once judged. But that was not the cruelest part of the curse. "You will marry," Odin declared, "and you will marry the first man brave enough to wake you." He placed her on a mountain top, surrounded by a wall of fire that no ordinary warrior could penetrate. She fell into an enchanted sleep, trapped in her own body, conscious but unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything but wait. For years, she waited. And then Sigurd came. Sigurd, the dragon slayer, the greatest hero of his age, wearing armor bathed in dragon's blood that made him immune to flame. He rode through the fire without fear, climbed to the top of the mountain, and found her sleeping in full battle armor, beautiful and terrible, even in unconsciousness. He removed her helmet. He cut away the armor that had fused to her skin, and when he finally freed her, she woke gasping, eyes wide with the kind of relief that comes from escaping a living tomb. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am Sigurd," he said, "and I have been searching for you all my life without knowing it." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw something she had never seen in centuries of watching warriors die. A man who did not fear death, who rode through fire not for glory, but because something inside him demanded he find her. And she fell in love, not because of Odin's curse, but in spite of it. They exchanged vows. He gave her a ring of twisted gold, a band that bound them beyond any law. They swore they would find each other again, no matter what fate or gods tried to separate them. But the story does not end with love. It ends with betrayal, with murder, with Brynhildr throwing herself onto Sigurd's funeral pyre because she could not bear to exist in a world without him. It ends with a Valkyrie choosing death over life because love had made immortality unbearable. But she was not the only one who defied Odin for love. Sigrún was a Valkyrie bound to the king Hodbrod, a man chosen by her father to be her husband. She despised him, not because he was cruel, but because he was the choice made for her. Another chain in a life where every choice had already been decided by men and gods who believed they owned her. And then she saw Helgi. Helgi Hundingsbane, the wolf-hearted warrior who fought with a savagery that bordered on divine madness. He was everything Hodbrod was not: wild, free, unchained by expectation or duty. Sigrún descended to the battlefield where Helgi fought her betrothed. She was supposed to ensure Hodbrod's victory, but instead, she whispered strategies into Helgi's ear, guided his sword arm, weakened his enemies with invisible hands. She helped him kill the man she was supposed to marry. And when Helgi stood victorious, covered in blood, breathing hard, he looked up and saw her hovering in the air above him, this impossible woman made of lightning and steel. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "Because I choose you," she said, "and I will never stop choosing you." They married in secret, away from gods and fathers. They built a life in the spaces between worlds, in the moments stolen from fate. But fate is a patient hunter. Helgi's enemies found him. A warrior named Dag, sworn to vengeance, tracked him to a forest clearing and drove a spear through his heart. Helgi died, and Sigrún, despite all her power, could not save him. His body was placed in a burial mound, sealed away from light and life. The ritual was complete. He was gone. But Sigrún refused to accept it. Every night, she went to his burial mound. Every night, she crawled inside the darkness and lay beside his corpse, wrapping her arms around bones and rotting flesh, whispering his name until dawn forced her to leave. The villagers thought she was mad. They warned her that the dead should not be disturbed, that her grief was unnatural. But on the third night, something answered her. Helgi's ghost rose from his body, pale and hollow-eyed, still bleeding from the wound that killed him. "You must stop coming here," he said. "Every tear you shed, I feel as a wound. Your grief is keeping me from rest." "Then I will grieve forever," Sigrún said, "because a world without you is not one I wish to inhabit peacefully." "You are a Valkyrie," Helgi's ghost whispered. "You were made to carry the dead, not to join them." "I was made for many things," she said, "but I was not made to forget you." She died 3 days later, some say from grief, some say from choice, and in death, she was finally reunited with Helgi in a version of Valhalla that Odin did not control, a place carved out by the sheer force of love that refused to obey the rules. But what happens when a Valkyrie does not just fall in love with a warrior? What happens when she is the one fighting alongside him? Hervör was not born a Valkyrie. She became one through sheer, bloody will. She was the daughter of a Viking warrior and a shield maiden, raised in a world where women were expected to weave and bear children. But Hervör looked at swords the way other girls looked at jewelry, and when she was old enough, she dressed as a man and joined a crew of Viking raiders. She fought like a demon. She killed without hesitation. And when her crew was slaughtered in battle, she stood alone against 20 men and won. The Valkyries saw her that day. They saw a mortal woman who fought with the fury of the divine, and they offered her a choice: die as a human or ascend as one of them. Hervör chose Ascension. But there was one thing she needed first: her father's sword, Tyrfing, the cursed blade that killed everything it touched, the weapon that had been buried with him in his grave mound. So Hervör did what no Valkyrie had ever done. She raided her own father's tomb. She went at night, alone, tearing open the burial mound with her bare hands. Her father's ghost rose to stop her, warning her that Tyrfing was cursed to kill everyone who wielded it. "Then it is the perfect sword for me," Hervör said, and she ripped it from his skeletal hands. She fought with that blade for decades, carving her name into history with blood and iron. She refused marriage. She refused peace. She lived as a storm given human form. But the curse could not be denied forever. In her final battle, surrounded by enemies, Tyrfing turned in her hand and drove itself through her own heart. She died standing, the sword still gripped in her fist, her eyes still blazing with defiance. The Valkyries came to collect her soul, but they did not take her to Valhalla. They took her to a higher place, a hall reserved for those who transcend even the gods' expectations. Because Hervör had proven something the cosmos tried to hide, that a woman could become death itself, and that the only curse stronger than a weapon was the will to wield it. But not all Valkyries choose warriors. Some choose poets. There was a poet named Thorleif who never touched a sword. In a culture that worshipped warriors, he was an anomaly, a man who believed words were stronger than steel, that a well-crafted verse could outlive any empire. The Vikings mocked him. They called him weak. They said he would never see Valhalla because he refused to die in battle. But Göndul, the Valkyrie of storms, heard him sing one night by a fire. He sang of the northern lights, of the way the sky bleeds color during winter, of how even the gods must envy beauty that exists only to be witnessed and never owned. She appeared before him, fully visible, her armor crackling with electricity. "Sing for me," she commanded. Thorleif, terrified but unable to resist, sang. He sang of Valkyries not as instruments of death, but as women trapped between worlds, forever choosing who dies, but never able to choose who they love. Göndul wept, and her tears burned like acid where they struck the ground. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Because I see you," Thorleif said. "Not what you do, who you are." She visited him every night after that. She would arrive in silence, sit across from him, and listen as he composed verses about her, not as a warrior, not as a servant of Odin, but as a being caught between duty and desire. And slowly, impossibly, she fell in love with a man who had never killed anyone. When Thorleif grew old, when his voice began to fail, Göndul made a choice. She went to Odin and begged him to allow Thorleif into Valhalla, despite never dying in battle. Odin refused.